Welcome everybody. I'm Mark Fox of the Business Innovation Leaders Forum and delighted to be conducting this event today with our partners, Dell'Oro Group. Mauricio Sanchez, who's the Research Director of Network Security, SASE and SD-WAN. The Dell'Oro Group is chairing today's session and he will also introduce the panel. So Mauricio, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, the case may be. I'm here today with a distinguished set of panelists that you can see here on the slide. We've got Ryan Hammer from Ciena, John Kindervag from Onto IT, Ron Layton from Sallie, Bont from ServiceNow, and Srini from Tata Communications. In a couple of minutes, each of the panelists will get to introduce themselves, but really glad to have them here for today's conversation. And before we get to introductions, I have a couple of prepared remarks about today's conversation, a little bit about what we do here at Dell'Oro from a market research perspective. Again, from Dell'Oro Group, I own the network security and SASE SD-WAN. First, to baseline in terms of a number of things that I want to discuss. Obviously, cybersecurity is an iceberg, and I'm not here to say that I represent all of cybersecurity because we're really focusing on that intersection that straddles the networking world and that cybersecurity world. So with a main emphasis in network security. However, there are some adjacent markets that are very close in the orbit of the constellation of network security. And what I show here is what's near and dear to me from a research perspective. So day in and day out, I'm tracking the vendors, the technology landscape that fit into the buckets that I have on this slide. So a number of the remarks that I'll share here momentarily are anchored to this perspective on this particular map or landscape. So in the focus of our services, network security, that and no great surprise is anchored to a number of technologies that have been around in the marketplace for a very long time. So firewalls, email security, or secure web gateways as platforms that are now increasingly becoming cloud delivered. And on the application and delivery and security side, closer to the data center, are things like web application firewalls and application delivery controllers. And then running the WAN networking, because WAN enterprise networking and security, and network security in particular, are coming together. So access routing and SD-WAN are coming together with a number of security elements, as you can see in the black lines here, to give rise, in our perspective, to what I call the great convergence of SASE. And so that's a very interesting space right now, and we'll be discussing a little bit about SASE as an acronym, because I think that's another thing here that we want to tease out is in terms of today's challenges from a CISO perspective. What is the set of technologies out there and the perspectives on that, and understand where the gaps are and the opportunities for a contemporary CISO to be able to embrace. But rounding out the network security and the SASE SD-WAN landscape are adjacent areas that today we're not tracking, but I'm keeping my sights on in order to extend the service at some point in the not too distant future. An example of that is what we see as a domain of cloud workload security. So as people move workloads and applications into a cloud architecture, there's a whole set of security implications there that are keeping people up at night. And there's a number of technologies and a large number of vendors who are trying to penetrate that particular space. On the other flip side, of course, is the endpoint security that continues to be something that is a very long-standing market. That endpoint security has been here for a long time, and I don't expect it to go anywhere else or anywhere in the near term. And then lastly, rounding out is the security framework, management framework that wraps everything around. And here you could see another couple of buzzwords, some buzzwords that used to be hot 10 years ago, like SIM, and others that are very hot today, like XDR. And again, I look to the panelists to be able to in our second section of the conversation, dig into some of these buzzwords and get their perspectives coming from the trenches of the day-to-day experiences that they have. So considering that my focus point is that straddling of the networking and the cybersecurity landscape in the context of technology segments like firewalls and SD-WAN and this emergence of SASE, what are the market forces and trends that we see from our perspectives as in the analyst community? So on this slide, I share 2 anchor points that seem to be the 2 larger market forces that have been percolating for the last 2 years. In some instances, probably longer than that. I think these last 2 years, the first anchor point here that everyone's gotten slapped in the face by is right. So I think we've seen a huge increase in attacks and the whether it be ransomware, whether it be denial of service attacks, you name it. It seems that the hacker community is taking advantage of the current situation. And I think hybrid work is a second one from a market force that has resulted in an upheaval of enterprise IT and what to do with the remote workforce. And then the last piece is the shift to everything being online because we couldn't meet in person, and being able to touch your customers or your clients with a digital experience has really motivated enterprises to up their game and invest, but in doing so also open themselves up to a new set of security implications. So these to me are kind of the recent term market forces that are in play. But underlying this, at least in that straddling of networking and security, we've continued to track what we call secular trends. So things that have been longstanding and are something that just continued the innovation churn, whether it be from the hacking community or from a response side on being able to mitigate these security risks. But the first one is, as network speeds go up, that means there's more traffic. The amount of speeds globally now flying across all the internet links that connect us together is astronomical. And so as we move to 400 gig, as we embrace 5G connectivity that is bringing ubiquitous connectivity to almost every point in the world, there are security implications, right? There's massive ones and that need to be thought of. Likewise, new IT paradigms, whether it be IoT or be edge compute. I'm hearing a lot of chatter from the sensor network that we have, whether it be enterprises, whether it be VARs, whether it be the vendor community, about how is it that you protect the IoT environment that's starting to blossom, and as well as what is edge compute going to mean to an enterprise as workloads start getting split up and decentralized to get closer to where the action is happening. And then lastly, I think enough can't be said about things like AI and new technologies that are being anchored to the AI methodology, both for good as well as for bad, right? So I think this is something that the technology innovation and churn that's constant with us, in particular, an example of AI, is leading to some interesting developments on the vendor and technology landscape. So what does it all mean over the last couple of years in terms of what's the outcome and what do we see? And again, this is something that during the panel session, I'd love to get a response to from our panelists about whether they agree or disagree, or what they see from their perspective. But at least from us, coming from being the outside entity looking in across a number of different venues, dollars for security, investment in security has increased significantly over the course of the last 10 years, and it continues to be a larger and larger piece of the pie from our quantitative modeling. Secondarily, as things move to the cloud, we're moving from an architecture that was dominated by hardware, where it was physical appliances, to one that is now increasingly biased towards cloud-delivered security capabilities, in particular in the network vein. So that's a fundamental shift in terms of the consumption model, going from amortized appliances to now a subscription model, and so from the CapEx to the OpEx in other terms. And then lastly, we see an emerging preference for the vendors who are already large to getting larger, because they're expanding it into adjacent domains and really looking to become a end-to-end platform from a security perspective. Because if there's anything that we know from the last 20 years in the cybersecurity landscape, is it's extremely fragmented. Not that it's going to consolidate, or that we see consolidating anytime soon, but there seems to be areas in particular in this straddling between network and security, where the large are getting larger as they expand and look to grab the entire share of wallet from a CISO and be able to service the enterprise. So that's what we see as market forces and trends. And again, we're going to have a section to be able to hit on that and get a discussion going on what our panelists see in this perspective. So here at Dell'Oro, we love numbers because we're a quantitative market research firm. So not only do we try to paint the narrative in terms of what's happening in the landscape from a technology perspective, but we also look at it from the business perspective, since what we deliver are the numbers to these technology markets. So I mentioned that dollars for security appear to be increasing from our perspective. And specific to the network security landscape that and the technology segments that I discussed previously, now, this is the way the year-on-year growth has looked like over the last 10 or so years. Yes, you can see in 2020 we had a dip, and I think that was caused by the great pause that a lot of enterprises who all of a sudden when the hit didn't know exactly what they needed to do or just weren't unable to continue forward because of social distancing and other health measures. But we see that 2021 came back roaring in the way that we haven't seen recently in terms of the year-on-year growth. And we see this momentum continuing at least for a short while longer. And again, the market forces I described previously, we believe to be the basis for this. And so over time, you see that the rate of growth, rather than decreasing, seems to be increasing, given that linear plot and that black line that I show here. So demand for security, at least from this very much quantitative perspective, shows to be increasing significantly. So the last point here on the quantitative basis before we get to our discussion is, as I said, another phenomenon or trend that we see is a shift from hardware to cloud delivered network security. So going from an age where it was the hub and spoke with hardware deployed at each point, and then the enterprise care and fed that hardware through its lifetime, to one where a new breed of security vendors has come into the fold that are delivering their value exclusively through the cloud. There is no hardware to buy. There's just a contract to sign at the bottom, and then you're off to the races. And so here you could see for the network security market that I cover, how has the balance of trade shifting over the course of the last several years, but where do we see, looking into our crystal ball, things going? And so you can see the blue bars are the physical appliance world. So think of this as the classic firewall that has sat in the perimeter for many years. Where is it going? You could see that it's not going away, but it's not growing at the same rate that, say, the counterpoint, the cloud delivered, which are the orange bars, which we started tracking around 2018, 2019. And you could see that from our perspective, the vendors that are participating in this particular space are growing very quickly and expected to grow to the point that the combination of the cloud delivered as well as the virtual appliance or the software mode of network security is together, those two are going to be larger than the hardware segment, which is a pretty drastic shift in the pendulum from where we've come from, which in the last 20 years, the network security landscape has been dominated by the sheet metal, and that's where the attention and the dollars have been going, and where the source or where the clear innovation has been focused on. So very interesting times that we live in. And so with that, those are my prepared remarks for today. At this point, I'd like for each of the panelists to spend about a minute introducing themselves. And so we'll go off the order here from left to right, starting with you, Ryan. So hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Ryan Hammer, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Ciena. I've been with the company for just under 6 months or so, but I'm responsible for the overall strategy and execution of our enterprise and product security functions. I've been building and leading security programs for about 15 years now across a wide range of industries. And I also teach at the college level as adjunct faculty. I'm teaching currently at the Citadel here in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. And I also teach for Carnegie Mellon's executive education program for CISOs. So I'm very excited to be part of the panel today and looking forward to a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. You must not be busy enough in your day job that you got the
Sure.
adjunct faculty position. Well, thank you for the introduction. John, on to you.
John Kindervag here. Well, I've been a friend of Mauricio's for years. We met when I was at Forrester and he was at HP. And so I spent 8.5 years at Forrester, and that's where I created ZeroTrust. So if you've heard this buzzword ZeroTrust, which we'll probably talk about a little bit today, I'm the person who created it. I left Forrester, did 4 years at Palo Alto Networks, and now I'm at a managed services company out of the Netherlands called Ontoit, and we do managed services from a zero trust perspective. So this is part of my zero trust journey, taking it from an idea to a build to a service. So thanks for having me, Mauricio. Good to be reconnected after all these years.
Likewise. So quite distinguished to have Mr. Zero Trust here, and security community is so small. I always say leave friends behind, not enemies, because you never know you're going to run across it yet again. So thanks for that, John. On to you, Ron.
Good day, everybody. Thanks for having me back on the Business Innovation Leaders Forum. I'm Ron Layton. I'm the current Vice President of Convergence in Security Operations at Sallie Mae. I've been with Sallie Mae for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was the acting assistant director in the United States Secret Service with a variety of assignments. I was the first presidential liaison assigned to President Obama, responsible for the day-to-day operations and long-term strategy of presidential information systems, as well as a former deputy director of the National Cybersecurity Division, and also the program director of the Electronic Crimes Task Force. While a lot of what I did was technological, I actually came from a law enforcement organization. And the thing that I think that I brought that was a little different, I was a technologist that showed up at a law enforcement organization, not someone who found technology in the last 3 or 4 years of my career. So prior to this, I taught physics and mathematics at a university in Pittsburgh. And prior to joining the Secret Service, I wrote software as an electrical engineer for supervisory control and data acquisition systems. So I'm your guy that shows up that has a good bit of a geek hat on and also carried a pistol. Thanks, everybody.
Well, don't mess with geeks with the pistols, I guess, right? But that's quite a colorful career. I can't imagine the nation state adversaries that you had to face in previous positions. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts on today's topics. So with that, on to you, Ben.
Thanks, Mauricio. Good day, everybody. Ben Bont, the Chief Information Security Officer for ServiceNow, dialing in from Seattle today. The role of ServiceNow, I've been there for 3 years. It's threefold: protecting our company and our customers. The second is to provide trust, transparency, and assurance to our customers, many of who are the most regulated or critical infrastructure or federal governments globally. The third part of that role is using our own security products, testing them out, providing feedback to our product division. Prior to this role, I've had a number of CISO-related positions as the CISO for IBM Cloud, HP Cloud. I ran information security for MySpace, for those that remember that social network. And prior to that, I did incident response at Microsoft for their online services, Hotmail, Messenger, and the infrastructure that was Bing and is very much Azure today. Great to be here.
Great to have you here, Ben. Another very distinguished career already, and look forward to your insights in terms of what we've got for today's topics. And so, last but not least, Srini from Tata, introduce yourself.
Thank you. Happy to be here with all of you, and it was great knowing each one of you, understanding what you've all done. I've been with Tata Communications for the past 10 plus years. I'm responsible for the managed hosting, cloud, and security business. The Chief Information Security function and the Chief Information Officer function rolls up to me. So I do both the inward-facing activities for security and digital transformation, as well as take out services to market. So Tata Communications is the first customer for every service that we launch. We've been doing this for the last 10 years now. Ever since I've been around, that's when we started the practice. So happy to be with all of you, and looking forward to learn from each one of you and participate as much as I can.
Thanks a lot, Srini. Again, look forward to your comments, given your perspective of in the trenches. And so with that, let's jump in. So for today, we've got a 3-part discussion. And the first one is I want to get the panelists discussing and getting their perspectives on what do they see as the challenges or the market forces or industry forces and trends. So kind of give us that perspective of the big picture, right? And then we'll zero in terms of specific technologies that the industry is very hot on, and we'll get their perspective on which ones are hot, which ones are duds from their vantage points. And then the last piece is discussing what are the recommendations or the outcomes, and if they were speaking to the vendor community, where are the gaps and what should be the attention in order to be able to service not just today's needs from a CISO perspective, but looking towards the future and trying to paint a little bit about what may come into the forthcoming landscape. But again, first topic is challenges, forces, and trends. And so the question to the panelists that Srini, I'd like for you to tee things off in today's discussion is, what do you see as today's forces and trends, right? What's keeping you up, and what do you see as a landscape from your perspective?
So thanks, Mauricio, for that question. I think there are, I'm sure, all of us, and you set the context fairly well as well. There are too many things that are, changing and changing rapidly for the comfort of anyone in any enterprise. I think the added to the pace of things or disrupted many things or, created opportunities, created challenges. I think the industry has overcome many of them or beginning to overcome some of them. With that, I think, let me call out a few, large trends. I think you covered some of them as well. So I'll quickly re-jog everybody's, memory on that one. One is, I think, remote work, virtual or work from anywhere has become a reality. A distributed workforce is a norm. People can work from anywhere. So those are things that I think, we've accepted in the last couple of years. Going digital, I think there's a second big trend, and that has been on for a while now. Many companies, have been pushing for it. Many enterprises in specific have been pushing for a lot of their things to be digital. But I think this got accelerated, and more importantly, people started questioning processes that were not going digital for various reasons, either for security or there needs to be an ink that needs to be on paper for whatever reason. People started questioning that, and that put pressure on the digital transformation process to sort of make the digital acceleration a lot more faster and cover more processes that so far were not included in the digital transformation process. Related to that, I think two things happened. One is, I think there's been a movement of skill and talent from one organization to another. In the last 6 to 8 months, I think that's been a phenomena. And that's impacting, many things, continuity of work and skills and what you can do and how fast you can do. And of course, the move to cloud has been, accelerated, and more, workloads are moving to the cloud. And that, is actually putting a pressure on, security, network, and whatever, standard operating procedures that an enterprise would have. So added to all of this, I think there's been an ongoing network, transformation with an intent to improve performance and reduce cost. And that's where you spoke about, the SD-WAN plus the associated stack, which is important for enterprises to move to the internet, save cost, and improve performance of, provide more, resources to their enterprise. And along with that, I think the change is blurring of boundaries, which means network, security, edge. I think the boundaries are blurring a lot faster, or they're coming together a lot closer, and that's creating its own challenges. So this is on the broad technology trends and what we're doing on transformation, and what we're doing on people, skills, etc. If you leave that aside for a moment and look at what are the challenges from a business perspective, because I wear that hat as well. I think businesses are being challenged more and more by customers, because they're facing different situations in their businesses. And they're looking for, newer things and newer capabilities much faster than, what they expected, prior, and thereby businesses are now compelled, to sort of do newer things to cope up with the market expectations, compete effectively in the market. And businesses are also wanting to become a lot more dynamic or a lot more composable, which is a common word that's being used today, How can we become more flexible in the work that we do? And along with all of this, digital trust is becoming important. As you go more digital trust is important. And there are a lot of enabling technologies that are at play, and there are a plethora of choices for enterprises to choose from. They have the challenge of being able to piece through solutions, put together solutions, and also understand what the trends are, like what you called out, what's relevant, what's not relevant, and bringing together an integrated view of what's happening in the enterprise around security. Along with that, bring in a zero trust, approach. Make sure that they are, helping their businesses, be safe in the digital world and improve on digital trust. What are the immediate things that they're looking at from where I sit and see things? I think more and more companies are looking at secure application access. How can we do it with zero trust network access? XDR is a common technology that people are looking at. And also the whole thing around SASE, what can I do with SD-WAN plus the stack? I think those are start points for a conversation, from challenges, forces, and trends. So I'll pause here and see if there are other comments from fellow panelists.
Srini, thank you for those comments. I think you've expanded this into a number of domains that we're going to touch on here in just a second and deeper. But going back to a couple of the things that you said in terms of the skill and talent challenges, I have heard that now come through in a number of my conversations, as well as cost as an underlying challenge and TCO measures, right, from a business metric perspective. But and the speed of change is another one that jumped out at me. Now, opening it up to the other panelists, what do other folks think? Is it somewhat in the same vein of what I said, because Srini kind of mapped into what some of the things and latched onto the things I said, or are there other things that you think are the driving the market or key forces that drive today's CISO conversations?
Srini, I wholeheartedly embrace everything that you said, completely agree with you. Thank you for sharing your insight. I think the big picture is that as cyber risk professionals, we continue to embrace human behavior and try to wrap security blankets around it. So for me, it's my 3 C's. It's human beings are curious, we want convenience, and we want to be comfortable. And so all of these things provide challenges in a security environment. And so as risk professionals, we have to continue to evolve and respond to these things. So you think about what it drove everybody home. And so now we've got individuals who, at least in my area, there's something called the Beltway in Washington, DC. Well, there's a bunch of people who have discovered they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want that hour-and-a-half drive. And so even when it comes to other things that we took for granted, I can't tell you how much my dry cleaning bill has declined. Why? Because now I have a bunch of loungewear and I can sit and I can do work remotely. And so that's more comfortable for me. It's more convenient for me. What does that mean for a CISO or a risk executive? Well, it's the push towards the SASE environment. It's the push towards this whole notion of zero trust. Why? Because I'm not in the corporate network environment anymore. So once again, the overarching point is that how do we as risk professionals, how do we adjust to the human behaviors that ask us as professionals to wrap a security blanket around those professionals to make sure that we're still operating in a secure environment. Now, here's the other thing too. All of a sudden, we're at home, and being at home really does shift your behaviors. And so now I think there is a greater tendency to see an interplay between dealing with a corporate workload. Oh, wait a minute, I want to check my Facebook. I want to check my Gmail. And so now all of a sudden, how can I do that in a secure environment? And how can we as risk professionals, adapt to that environment and still be reasonably secure that we are driving risk to zero? And so those present significant challenges for us all, but I think it's a prime time and an opportunity to really embrace a SASE framework, a zero trust framework, We wish that acronyms like SASE or ZeroTrust were simply pieces of software that we could switch, but of course we can't. They're all approaches. But again, my commentary is that we continue to have to wrap security blankets around the human notions for curiosity, convenience, and comfort.
Thanks for those comments, Ron. Yes, it kind of reminds me of the old joke that there's hardware, there's software, and then there's wetware, right? So you got to think about the people in the security equation. And if you could get rid of the wetware, hey, your security problems would be completely solved. So you touched on a couple of security technologies. I'm going to circle back in the second chapter here momentarily, because you mentioned a couple of the buzzwords that are flying in the landscape. So SASE, ZeroTrust. So I'm going to come back to you, Ron, and in our next section. But before we jump to that, I guess I want to see if anyone else here from the panel has a perspective that either falls in line to Srini's or to Ron's. Now, I'm a bit surprised. I haven't heard anything about ransomware yet, or the attack landscape. Is that changed significantly here recently for in today's environment, or is it just one of those standing things that, hey, yeah, it's been here, it's been there. We've had that problem for a long time, and it's a market force that isn't going to go away, and it continues to be just an element of the conversation. Ryan.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So I often talk about the internet being a pretty rough neighborhood, right? There are statistics on if you have an unpatched machine with internet connectivity, what's its survival rate, and it's measured now in minutes, maybe hours, not weeks or months. And I think, over the last few months here with some of the kinetic warfare activity that's occurring, I think that some of the, the governance and the whatever oversight was happening there has been loosened. And it's starting to feel more like a free fire war zone than just a rough neighborhood. Certain sectors, I think, are being hit much harder than others. But with this pervasive kind of porous perimeter of having machines and people all over the world working at various different hours, connecting to a wide range of infrastructure, that really it does a whole lot for our attack surface area. And in many cases, really makes it much more difficult for us to truly manage that well without some of these additional technologies that are helping us, adapt to the new environment. So it's a very rapidly changing landscape for sure. And I feel that the deck is often stacked against us as CISOs, whereby, it's the old adage that the threat actor only has to be successful once, and we have to be successful every time. And we also can only operate at the pace that the business will allow us to operate. It's difficult to get new products and solutions through procurement and to do proof of concept testing and get financing for it and get folks trained up on it. Whereby threat actors can very rapidly advance their tactics and take advantage of the latest vulnerability or the latest new tactic that will allow them to execute on their objectives. So yeah, it's always busy.
Yeah, Ryan, attackers don't have change control. So right away,
that's right.
we're behind, right? And they don't have compliance mandates. I mean, God bless each and every one of you here, because I would never do any of your jobs because it's mostly paperwork, right? Compliance. There's way too much compliance, out there, and a lot of it overlaps and self-contradicts. So it's a very hard job. And then you look at things like ransomware, where we see the laws of unintended consequences because we started to insure for ransomware. That increased the amount of ransomware. And I was just talking to a lawyer who was negotiating on the dark web a ransomware payment, and he offered what he thought was an extraordinarily large amount of money, and they sent back to him the insurance policy with the amount of money that the company was going to get highlighted, and said, nope, that's how much we're getting. And he said, well, you got me there, right? You got me. What can I say? So just like when life insurance was invented, you had a rash of murders. The invention of cyber insurance has created a rash of ransomware attacks. So we have to be real careful about what we think is innovation versus what is maybe not so innovative.
Thanks for those comments, John. I really am astounded that you guys all look so fresh, considering just the things that keep you up at night, right? So it looks like you guys managed to sleep pretty well at night, considering the thorny landscape that this contemporary CISO needs to deal with. And I guess with that, we can switch to our second topic, because as my friend John corrected me, a lot of champing at the bit here to talk about technology, right? So playing the little bit of the buzzword bingo here from the perspective that for today, we want to discuss the vendor landscape, right? We wanted to first set the challenge, which I heard remote workforce, I heard skill set, I heard the fact that things are moving very fast, the threat surfaces are expanding and quite fluid. There's still a lot of bureaucracy that's hampering to be able to move fast as the attack community is moving. And so obviously one of the key components in helping address the security problems is the technology in the vendor landscape. And so for this chapter, before we get to kind of getting to what you are recommending to your vendor community or to what providers recommendations, I want to pick on and have you guys become the analysts, right? So from my position, I get to be in a peanut gallery and throw darts and probably sometimes FUD at some of these acronyms or technology. So whether perhaps some of these are good, right? So Bont, you said that you're a believer of SASE and ZeroTrust, or perhaps some of these for some of you may jump out and say, no, that's not really where it's at. It's somewhere else. But we'll start with you, John. Given that we're distinguished to have you here as Mr. ZeroTrust, I know you've got some strong comments around the usage of ZeroTrust and the concept. So what's your take on this technology profile of ZeroTrust?
Well, there is no technology profile on ZeroTrust. ZeroTrust is a strategy designed to stop data breaches and make other cybersecurity attacks unsuccessful. And so when you take that strategic approach, you can change the whole game. That's when I joined Forrester in 2008. I wanted to bring strategy to cybersecurity because most people, as one of my mentors taught me years and years ago, confuse strategy and tactics. So they say they're being strategic, but they're actually being tactical. And that's where we spend all of our time, is in the tactics. So I work with all kinds of organizations around the world on helping them protect things using zero trust modalities. And it's very common that they want to talk about products. Where do I put this widget or that doohickey? And I'll ask, what are you trying to protect? And they don't even know. So zero trust is about protecting things. And if we don't understand what we're protecting, then we're going to be completely unsuccessful. So just Ronald, one of the main things that I use in my presentations is how the U.S. Secret Service protects the President of the United States. They know who the president is. They don't do presidential discoveries. They know where the president is at all times, and then they know who should have access to the president at any given time. If you change your focus from what your technology is to what you're protecting, it's just going to make your life a lot easier. And that's what Zero Trust is all about: a strategy designed to protect things and designed actually to be resonant to the highest levels of your organization, which is why you saw the presidential executive order on Zero Trust, because it has strategic resonance.
Thanks for those comments, John. Yes, I think too often tactics and strategy are mixed together, and I think everyone is looking for that panacea, that easy button, right? And so if strategy could be productized, that would be a great utopia. But unfortunately, unicorns don't exist either, and strategies as a product don't as well. Ben, we haven't heard from you, so I'd like to hear from you in terms of, what's your thoughts on this buzzwords that are flying about? Do you have a comment on any of these, or perhaps some others, right? That from the perspective that you sit from.
Mauricio, it's a healthy dose of skepticism. I'm really excited that we do have John with us, and the way in which he described this particular buzzword, Zero Trust, which he created. To me, it means centralized authentication and distributed authorization. But I know from running large security teams for a long time, if I go and start asking security people what zero trust means to them, I get a very different answer. And so I actually love to take the opportunity to ask you a question, John. Have you ever seen a zero trust implementation that you thought was really well done?
Hundreds upon hundreds of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've built myself a lot of them, and then I work for a company where we've built over 300. So yes, the problem has been up until now, zero trust is like Fight Club. The first rule is you don't talk about it. So it's hard to get people to talk about their zero trust environments. But that's the reason that you saw the president issue the executive order. It's because the advisors and a lot of those people that I've been working with over the years have been pointing out how successful it has been. So, and it's not just authentication. That's one of the main, and authorization. It's not just the identity portion of it. That's what's been spun by identity vendors. So if you're an identity vendor, zero trust is identity. If you sell proxies, zero trust is proxies. If you're a firewall vendor, zero trust is a firewall. None of those things are true. There are times when you use various technologies once you understand what you're protecting. But there are tons and tons of very successful zero trust environments. And I use the word environment because we're always talking about a protect surface. What am I protecting? I can take the attack surface, shrink it down orders of magnitude to something very small and easily known called a protect surface. That could be a DNS server or a system. It could be, I do it for ATMs. I do it for drill rigs. I've done it. I did it for a wind farm in the South Pacific. So you get into these smaller areas. You take this large problem called cybersecurity, break it down into very small parts, and now small things are solvable. Big things are not solvable. So that's the misunderstanding of zero trust is that it is that it's a binary thing, and either you're doing it or you're not doing it, and that's not true. You want to do it in small, incremental, iterative, and non-disruptive chunks.
Thanks for that color, John. So what I'm hearing, the conversation going, I really like where the direction is going, right? Is how some of these technology terms aren't really product terms. They're being abused as product terms, but in fact they're strategy, and those strategies can be embraced and done well, right? So John, as you pointed out, that you've been part of hundreds of instances of zero trust, and Ben, but I think you're also right that it's also, from a CISO perspective, good to have a dose of healthy skepticism, because some of these may, in fact, be snake oil or something similar to that. I guess going back to looking at the other ones here, right? So, because I think we've hit on zero trust pretty hard already. What did folks feel about the other ones? Are there other terms and technologies that are being bantered about by the vendor community? And I guess I should frame this more so from the vendor marketing, of which some of these could be technology terms, some of these could be just pure play marketing terms. So I want to get your perspectives on looking at it from the perspective of the peanut gallery, throwing things at the vendor community. Any other thoughts on some of these? I know, Ron, you had brought up SASE. Ron,
so
you had, I think, Sri, you brought XDR.
Let me sort of, add.
Okay, Sri.
Broadly, what you've put in here, when I look at it, I classify into two buckets. One is network security, and what all do you do around network? And the other one is all about application security and your software security, right? If you look at the vendor landscape here, there can be like probably 50 to 100 vendors who are doing different things, right? And some of them are partly doing stuff. Some of them are specializing in a very, very small area. And, some of them claim to do many things, under a framework, but they may not have, equal, capability or equal depth, in each one of these areas. But I think, as in any piece of work that you do in an enterprise or in a business, hygiene is very important. Like, for example, if you look at the supply chain compromises that have happened in the recent past, and And if you look at any enterprise, the inventory of applications that they run, the inventory of places where these are running, and what do you need to look for? Who are the contributors to that code? Where did that get done? Getting to some of this, root cause and saying, hey, how do I, sort of address them? Is it even relevant to me? Not relevant to me? I think a lot of, the products that you have in the market do things once you know what to do, right? But, you don't have the ability to constantly have discovery and an updated, information on the ecosystem that you live in, and which I think people should worry about, because things are not static in any world, and new things get added, new things get deleted. So what are you actually trying to sort of secure? And like what John was saying, know what you're protecting. And it's not as clear as the President of the United States all the time, right? You have a number of things changing, and it's a dynamic landscape. And how do you sort of manage that? How do you sort of get your hands around? There are different technologies. What do you deploy for what? I think there's a lot of help that's needed in these topics for customers to sort of make sense of what the vendors are offering to them and how do they put them to effective use.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'll add, there's lots of acronyms, and we talk about this as word, as acronym soup. It's just a reminder that it's so important to have a focus on the basics, right? There's a lot of really fundamental components here that I think can get a bit lost in the shuffle when we start asking questions like, gee, what's your AI DevSecOps strategy, and what's your AI DevSecOps strategy? We really need to focus on the fundamentals and make sure that those are just absolutely rock solid, that they're in place, that we're operating at a high level of maturity and capability there. Some of these are certainly important as we think about them operating as architectural components. I was super happy to hear John talk about ZeroTrust as an approach and as a philosophy, because I've always surprised how many emails I get of, hey, buy our ZeroTrust solution, implement ZeroTrust with just a few clicks. And, I think most of us can kind of sort that out and realize it's just a poorly worded, product marketing spin. But if we think about how we implement ZeroTrust, pretty much every day as a philosophy, even having relationships with third parties, some of these business to business DMZs that we all have, it's not that we don't trust partners and vendors, but it's just good practice. We need to implement security controls and capabilities wherever we can. And it isn't so much that we don't trust our vendors' networks or our partners' networks. It's just that bad things happen. And the more checks and balances we have, the more stopgaps and controls we put in place, the more likely we are to be successful to minimize the scope and duration of a security incident.
And Ryan, security basics are so important, but as technology becomes to be so much more pervasive in our lives year over year, that attack surface continues to expand, and achieving the security basics becomes more and more difficult. I think when I think about security vendor products, and we sell them ourselves, a rule of thumb that I use is to tell the security vendors what our requirements are for driving down risk, and not have them tell us what solutions they say we should do. And taking that risk-based approach and looking at our objectives and what we want to achieve, and then I'll go and consider some products rather than the other way around. And it's a little surprising to me how many times it happens in reverse. Oh, but there's an amazing new product, says it can solve all our problems. Well, I'll go use it. I'd rather say, hey, what risk am I trying to, risk objectives do I have? And then looking for a solution, whether it's something that I buy or build in-house.
So Ron, we'll go back to you in a second, because I think the conversation is shifting actually to the third topic. So let's bring the third topic to be able to drive this conversation towards a conclusion. Because Ben, you're absolutely right. Very often the vendor community, it comes with a product or technology looking for the problem, but sometimes that problem maps well to the enterprise, and so I think you're hitting on an answer to my last question here for the third topic, right? It's what if you were talking to the vendor community, and it seems like you were answering from that perspective. Now, what are the gaps they need to address? And I think you hit on one of them, right? Is it talk to me not as what's your shiny widget, but talk to me how do you help me reduce risk and improve my security posture? So I think that's a very salient one. Ron, I think you had a comment, and whether it brings us back to the second topic or brings us forward here on the third topic, go for it.
So I'm going to try to smash the two topics together. So first of all, I'd like to strongly associate my comments with everybody on the panel, in particular, John. Of course, the way and the manner in which the president is protected is near and dear to my heart. A couple of comments about that. If you've ever been to a presidential visit, you will find out that actually, if you were fortunate enough to get close to the president or shake a hand or do all of these kinds of things, it is incredibly inconvenient. Incredibly inconvenient, but it's accepted because most folks realize the environment that they're in. And so if you think about what we do in the cyber landscape, no one would put up with that level of inconvenience. And so we find an association with convenience and the security that we want rapidly. So it's just an interesting parallel. But I did want to say this. A high-level discussion has to start off with John's comment. What is it that you're trying to protect? And then to extend that a little bit more, what are you trying to protect? And then what are the vulnerabilities associated with that? Like, that's the big picture. And then from that point, you end up saying, okay, what is the strategy to do that? And to me, here's the secret sauce that goes to Ben's comment. You need to be strategically sound or strategically focused, but you need to be tactically aligned. So in other words, your tactics have to flow up to your strategy, and people confuse that all the time. And so what ends up happening is when you get a piece of gear, to push this into the third topic, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? Obviously, we're looking for what are those vulnerabilities associated with those vulnerabilities that are associated with those bad things, with those things that we're trying to thwart, that risk that we're trying to buy down, that strategy, those tactics that we're trying to employ to push those risk factors down to zero. If I've got a sound strategy and a set of tactics that flow up to them, it will be easier to determine whether that piece of gear that a vendor is trying to sell me simply fits into that paradigm. In other words, I'm trying to buy down my risk, not the risk that a vendor is trying to convince me that I have. And so that's the lens that I generally look at these kinds of things. So thank you for that time.
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? So I'm hearing a lot of back to basics, right? Don't own your own destiny. Don't let the vendor community own the destiny for your security strategy. Ryan, I know you had some strong thoughts on this last topic. What's your thinking?
Yeah, so to take us up a notch here, when I think about outcomes that we are continuously chasing, because rarely is anything truly just complete on the information security world. It all moves so fast and changes so much. We're always, constantly, planning, doing, and checking to make sure that it's still in place. But the first one, from lots of time with other, CISO peers, it's about, and these aren't in any priority order, but it's about being able to demonstrate that you have a commercially reasonable security program in place. It's very important to be observant and have traceability between the regulatory requirements that apply to us, the contractual requirements that will apply to us, and a lot of the industry standard practices that I think John observed sometimes conflict with other guidance. So it's really hard to manage that. But I think it's important, that we remember that we are stewards of the security program for our company, and we're responsible to make sure that all the pieces are in place and that we can comfortably demonstrate traceability between the things that we must be doing and should be doing and the things that we are doing. The second item for me is really obviously the most difficult, and I think it's been at the crux of a lot of the conversation today, and it's about protecting the business. And in some cases, that's about protecting customer data. Sometimes it's about protecting access to some of our partners and other vendors. Sometimes it's intellectual property or securing our products, but it is a very broad and diverse, challenge that I think, my first point around a commercially reasonable program maybe only gets us a fifth of the way there. There are so many evolving tactics, so many new attackers, so many new different attack trends that we have to be constantly on top of where this is all going and do our best to lead the target. And I think there are some, foundational aspects of a robust security program that pay dividends, even when attackers start shifting tactics. We all talk about defense in depth over and over again. I like to use the term detection in depth. So we can collect diverse sources of security relevant data and use that to identify indicators of not only malicious activity, but what about just suspicious, or what about anomalous? Tell me about weird things in my environment. And then the third is really kind of leveraging those as not necessarily competitive differentiators. I mean, sure, that's all nice to do, but to really start to kind of build those bridges of trust. I always encourage folks, whether it's folks in the Carnegie Mellon CISO program or my students, to build those relationships early with vendors and partners. If there's an opportunity to have a meeting and share tactics and strategy, to do a joint incident response tabletop. You don't want to be meeting these folks for the first time, when it hits the fan. Any opportunity you have to share information and be transparent and build relationships, we all need to take advantage of that. So those are my really kind of top three outcome-wise that I find that we're all looking to accomplish.
That makes a lot of sense. A lot of back to basics, but it's also investing time to have that technology vendor landscape become a partner for the long term. So with that, we got to get here into the opportunity for all of our panelists to provide parting thoughts. I'd like for you to provide some parting thoughts, whether it be additional thoughts on the topics that we discussed today, or what do you think that the additional recommendations for the contemporary CISO?
I think it's been a great conversation and great listening to all the panelists. From where to start and where to sort of do this. I think it's a complex landscape out there. My suggestion and advice would be to seek help, think carefully, which is again a basic. And like what Ryan said, look at a commercially viable security program and not something that you would ideally like to have, because it's always a trade-off between what risk you're trying to protect and vis-a-vis what cost can you sort of afford. And look at transformation in blocks, in logical blocks. Network transformation is a given. I think most of the companies are looking at SD-WAN plus that stack that leads up to a SASE stack. So that's important. Transform your network, make it more effective, but at the same time make it secure. The network plus security plus the edge continuum is going to happen. It's a reality. So you better accept that and start working through that. Application and workload security is another important thing, and I think people should look at it and say, where do I sort of put the controls in? How do I manage it? What do I do? Because SASE leads up to that. So that's where I would sort of conclude by saying network is important. Look at network transformation, security associated with it. Look at SASE. Look at edge. Because that's important for customer experience. But do look at other things in the infrastructure, which is application and software security, because you don't want to be vulnerable at the back of the system.
Thanks, Srini. Very salient wisdom there. Ben, on to you.
Thanks, Mauricio. So I would look at it this way. Many breaches, or at least in my opinion, most breaches these days are due to operational failures or mishaps to those very security basics that we have been discussing so much today. The buzzwords that we talk through, they represent concepts, or to John's great point, philosophies, and if executed well, can really help you achieve those security basics and potentially in new and innovative ways. But I think what I do and what I would recommend is focusing on the outcome from these concepts before you start exploring solutions, what it is that you want to achieve. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to driving down cyber risk, and it is not possible to eliminate it. So demonstrating a strategic, efficient approach to driving down risk with a foundation of continuous improvement is what you should and can expect from any security organization or business.
Thanks for that, thoughts. I'm really hearing this theme of be a leader, make sure you own your destiny versus letting get swayed by the latest buzzword or the latest vendor interaction. Ron, what are your parting thoughts?
So I think fundamentals in a back to basics approach typically will win most of the days. And, you know, it starts out with this conversation. Figure out what you want to protect, map your vulnerabilities, have a keen understanding of how to thwart those vulnerabilities, make it really, really hard for human beings, for human factors to do something that really is just screwy. You just need to make it hard for that to happen. And lastly, as a CISO, as a risk executive, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to eliminate the absence of a surprise. The idea is to control your environment. You should really never be surprised by some exogenous factor that you did not make an account for. In other words, if you think about what we do, I love the detection in depth. The idea is to put out all of these tripwires so at least you have a better idea of what's coming, and you need to be tactically focused, strategically aligned to be able to deal with these threats. But it's back to basics.
Again, hammering on that back to basics, right? Don't forget the basics, and you'll be served well. So thanks for those thoughts, Ron. John, what about you? What are your parting thoughts?
Well, I think we need to understand that the objectives aren't technological objectives or even cybersecurity, or I think it was Ryan who said information security, which is a much better term, right? What's a cyber and why do I need to protect it? These are things I don't understand, but what are the objectives of your business? You have to become a business enabler, a business driver. You have to figure out how does your security program improve revenue, improve profitability, keep bad things from happening, and how do you articulate that up to the board of directors? These are the key jobs of the CISO, in my opinion. And so if we focus on the technology all the time, which is always going to change and get better, well, I always used to say it gets better and better, and now I'm thinking that there's a lot of things that are getting less and less good. You know, we're as a friend of mine says, we're on a slope on the slope towards mediocrity, because all the things that we learned in the past we're forgetting. So in the cloud, you have stateless ACLs as your best security control, and everybody knows that every single attacker knows how to bypass those. So I'm a little bit worried that we've forgotten the lessons of history and we're doomed to repeat them. But understand what your business needs and talk in a business language. You'll be more successful in cybersecurity if you can do that, as opposed to spend all your time in the technology and the products and with the vendors. And I'm a geek too, so I love all that stuff, but I've had to learn over the years that if I'm hanging out with a CEO or a member of the board of directors, they just really could care less how elegant my spanning tree is.
Great thoughts, John. It was a pleasure. So Ryan, last but not least, what's your parting thoughts?
Yeah, this has just been an absolute pleasure. Really great advice from across the board here. I'll close out my comments with a little bit of a different perspective and advice, really kind of back to the vendor relationship piece. I think, you know, when vendors are seeking to close deals and sell new products, in many different industries, you know, there's a lot more flexibility on a product gone wrong or an implementation not quite meeting expectations. But on the security side, you know, we as security leaders who are responsible for this function, really, in many cases, stake our credibility on the products and the claims that we're getting from vendors. So, you know, I think taking that very seriously is really helpful for us, and making sure that we're building relationships, not just closing deals. This is something that, you know, we started earlier the conversation with what a small world it is. Most of us know each other really well. we all talk, and having credibility and being able to deliver in this market, in this world is exceptionally important. And those products that are able to do so, the vendors that build strong relationships and aren't just focused on selling the next acronym, are the ones that continue to thrive and do really well.
Thanks for those comments, Ryan. To close out, it seems everyone is hitting on, the landscape is getting harder and harder. Things are moving faster. Got to focus on the basics and have a strategy, not tactics. Have healthy skepticism about the vendor technologies that may show up, but at the same time, embrace the vendors to have relationships, because ultimately those relationships could bear fruit insofar that the technology they produce may be better suited to the outcomes that are desirable for the contemporary CISO. So again, thank you for everyone.